Okay, welcome to another episode of Out of the Fire podcast, where we talk about all things digital health tech, AI, interoperability, data, all the wonderful things that are exciting nowadays. And today I have on the show Michelle Skinner. Michelle and I met recently at a event talking about AI, actually, and she's in Pittsburgh, so she's a local. So welcome, Michelle. Really fantastic to have you on and talk about all the cool things that you're working on.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So can you give us a brief intro, maybe to your background and how you ended up in Pittsburgh, maybe, and teletracking, and what does teletracking do, maybe for those that don't know?
Yeah, you bet. So, Michelle Skinner, I'm the Chief Clinical Executive here at Teletracking. I am a nurse by background. I have always done healthcare. So, I started as a candy striper when I was 14 and did all the things to kind of get into healthcare. I did some patient registration, working at night. I was a tech in the ER and in the ICU, and then I went to nursing school. It really wasn't very altruistic. I was working night shift, and I saw that the nurses were having a lot of fun. They had great community, and they were working the same nights, weekends, and holidays I was, but they were making twice as much as I was. So I went to nursing school, and it was the best decision I could ever make. I had no idea where it would finally take me, but I started in emergency department and intensive care and quickly went into leadership roles. My first leadership role in the emergency department, they handed me a budget and I was like, wow, I had no idea that this was a business and I didn't know what anyone was talking about. So I did an MBA so that I could speak that language as well and found that the business of healthcare was also very interesting to me. At that point, I started running trauma centers, and from the kind of the entirety of that service line scope. So from the whole P&L of the entire scope, recruiting physicians, dealing with payers, and the regulatory side and the care delivery side. But within that, there's a deep commitment to your community that a health system provides when you decide to provide high-level services like trauma, cardiac, pediatrics, transplant, burns, those type of things. The commitment to the community is pretty significant, which means you've got to find space for those patients, which is how I got into patient flow. And so what teletracking does is orchestrate the care of patients across the continuum. So thinking about how you move patients from area to area and how you create more efficiency within that. We've spent 35 years doing that. So, and single owner based here in Pittsburgh. And so, which is really unusual in health tech these days, right? So we've not been acquired or PE backed or any of those kind of things. So we're focused really solely on how you get patients the right care at the right place at the right time, which is really important these days as care has gotten more and more complex across the continuum. I do live here in Pittsburgh. I am a Mountain West girl, grew up in Colorado, Montana, lived in the Pacific Northwest for a while, and moved to Pittsburgh about a year ago after I've been working for teletracking for 7 years, actually. But we did a partnership with Palantir and really began to accelerate how we use AI within our platform. And I knew it would be an exciting time to be closer to Pittsburgh. And personally and professionally, it worked really well for me. And it was the best move that I've made. It's sort of like going to nursing school. I wouldn't have imagined going to live in Pittsburgh, but being close to the office and being in Pittsburgh, where there really is so much technology buzz happening, has been just one of the best changes that I've made personally.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like, I didn't know about teletracking being still a owner, operated and owned. You've seen a couple of companies in Pittsburgh like that and other place, but very rare that you don't see companies taking outside money or investor money or PE. Very rare. So I think that's very commendable. And I actually have a connection, well, somewhat. When I was at UPMC, I did work at the Wolf Center with the great Tammy Minier over there, and then we used daily all the travel tracking tools. So that was really cool because, like, it's very hard to keep track of everything that's happening in the hospital, especially like ICU, trauma, all of that, right? So you guys have really made the efficiency of it and being able to use the trail tracking tools for that has been one of the reasons why, you know, I think UPMC has been able to meet a lot of those metrics, especially like you're talking about quality and patient safety and all of that. Like, it's extremely important to understand who's actually in the bed that's in the bed and what the flow and efficiencies of that, which I'm sure you and I can talk about all day long. And that's all you do that I know nothing about. But so the $1 million question is, I think everybody's going to have is like with AI, how is that impacting basically everything in the, we know healthcare moves super slow, right? We know that healthcare is probably the last to adapt every major technology or whatever. But actually with AI, I think McKinsey and some other ones put out reports where healthcare is actually out front in a lot of use cases with AI because it's just been really adopted by hospitals, by different areas of the hospital, from revenue cycle, probably revenue cycle first because that's always the driver. But what are your thoughts about it? And then what have you seen really with your experience
Yeah.
of how it's impacting the operations?
Yeah. I think there's several things. I think revenue cycle is its own beast, and it's been incredibly impactful for revenue cycle. I think we'll continue to see that. I think that's been a very slow and retrospective sort of a business. And so creating more real time thinking around that is going to be beneficial to everyone in the process. I think the second place that it's been really well adopted is in ambient listening. So, which takes a tremendous workload off of our physicians and other care providers in how they document. So they don't, that's kind of reducing that pajama time where physicians often have to sit in the evening, weekends, on nights, holidays, vacations, documenting the care that they provide. Really, from a perspective of it's always been retrospective, so they can't do it in real time. We tried getting scribes into that, and I think that was relatively effective, but ambient listening has really changed the game, particularly for physicians and other providers in reducing that sort of pajama time. I think we have a long way to go in how we reduce that same type of workload. Cognitive load is how I refer to that in nurses. So it just has not been as directed at nurses. The work that we do at teletracking is we use it in a way that it is a tool in our toolkit. So we are always outcome focused. If AI happens to be the thing that will help us gain those outcomes, then we are happy to use it. And we are using it in some really key places right now and always in the orchestration of care or flow. So, not in the care delivery, and we always have I know human in the loop is sort of this best practice, but also people kind of roll their eyes when you say it. It's a little of both, right? You need it, but they roll their eyes when you say it. But we really do have a human in the loop mentality, which is very cool. So one of the newest things that we've recently done uses a computational twin technology, so which is not new at all. They've used it in sort of nuclear, or they've used it in rocket building and kind of engineering and a number of other places, structural engineering for a long time, more than 20 years. However, it's not been used in healthcare often, and so it creates a digital twin of the healthcare scenario, your hospital, kind of what's happening in your hospital from a flow perspective, and allows you to do some scenario planning. Those trade offs are things that humans do every day. Thinking about if I kind of preserve the care that's happening or the status that's happening in the PACU, the post anesthesia care unit, what's that going to do to my emergency department? And I make the best choice that I can with the information I have at the time. But I can't know everything. But guess what? Technology can know everything. They can know it up to the last second, and they can scenario plan out what might happen if I make those decisions. And so it is a technology that we have in a couple of our partners already. And we're seeing results that are like blow you out of the water results, like a reduction of more than a day length of stay, a reduction of ED holds by more than 50% at the same time that they're increasing volume in the organization. And when you think about a patient safety perspective, there's two ends of that. One, you know, in the emergency department, we're really focused on what's coming in next. And so when a patient already has an admit order, it's not really a great place to be, is in the emergency department. Same with length of stay, right? We're all exposed to more and more that happens within the health setting. People are sick there. So the chances that you're going to get an infection or that something else will happen, the longer you stay, you get debilitated. You're not up moving around. You're not doing the things you're not with your family, which is actually a huge predictor of health and well-being. So the longer people stay in the hospital, the worse that is for them. So those two metrics alone are tremendous. And the reason that it's so effective is that it's not taking people out of their current workflows. And so there's only a few people kind of scenario planning, and then they push that model out to the rest of the organization, and everyone works from the same sheet of music. And you don't have to do it very often. So 48 hours in advance, I can think about what kind of staffing I need. And I'm not just getting certain patients out of the hospital, I'm getting patients out that I actually need, that there's someone actually that needs that bed. And so I think about how AI could be utilized in the world that we're in now. And it has to be in a way, for me, I'm very passionate that it reduces the cognitive load of our nurses. Like, we don't need nurses doing administrative tasks. They do not need to be running around seeing who's in beds or who's going to be discharged next, or making sure that radiology knows when to do the next exam. That is a place where technology can take over for them and allow them to do the work that they do best, which is caring for patients and the families that they're with. And so that's really passionate for me, and we're really meeting some of those challenges here at teletracking.
Fantastic. You know this was going to be coming, but have you watched The Pit?
This is so funny, Jean. I love that you asked me that because about a year ago, everyone was like, "Have you watched The Pit? Have you watched The Pit?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't watched The Pit. I don't watch medical drama because it's really painful."
You live it every day, right?
Yeah, and it's not usually accurate. But finally, I gave in and I watched The Pit. And there are so many things that I really love about it. It's still a medical drama, and so it is full of drama, right? It's something that we all want to tune into every week. And also, it's set here in Pittsburgh, which I think draws us all us Pittsburghers. We just are like, okay, that's very cool, and I got to watch it, and it feels very real because they use a lot of scenes from here in Pittsburgh. I think Noah Wiley is a little bit gritty, and he's kind of aged and gotten the way that I think all of us have over time since we all watched ER. I certainly know I have a few more gray hairs than I did then. And it has a lot of realism. I like things happen in time frames that are not realistic, but what happens is realistic. And so holding patients in the emergency department for hours and hours at a time, we're not talking just a couple of hours, we're talking days. And that is not the fault of the emergency department. That is a symptom of flow within the hospital. And it is a symptom of a lot of other things, but definitely flow within the hospital. And that is our life's work, right? That is how we spend every day, every night thinking about how we move patients through the system more expeditiously. I mean, my own self, I ended up in the emergency department a few weeks ago and sat in the hallway for 6 hours. The care was amazing. People were compassionate and kind, and they didn't want you to sit there, but they didn't have anywhere else to put you. And so that was just where it was. And it's kind of humiliating to be laying out in the middle of a hallway, puking your guts out or whatever it is that's happening. And I don't think that our caregivers want that for their patients, and patients certainly don't want that for their care.
Yeah. And I think the world is changing too. Like I think like back maybe 50 years ago, like emergency rooms have a kind of evolved as kind of like the central places of gathering for anybody that has something wrong with them. Boom, go to the emergency room. Then we've seen kind of the whole advent of urgent care, and that was supposed to help, but didn't really do much about that, right? And then we had the big explosion of telehealth during COVID. And now, do you really think that with AI and like, so being able to now effectively letting people effectively manage their own health, right? And really understand when do you need to go to an ER for real, right? So now everybody goes probably asks ChatGPT, hey, this is what's going on. This is what I'm feeling. Like for better or for worse, right? That's where we are. Or Claude now, right? ChatGPT probably a year ago. Now it's Claude. So like, and then they print out this big thing with them. Then they go to the emergency room probably, and they're like, here, this is what's Claude. Is that really? Do you see that like changing how ER actually functions, like
Yeah.
even the hospital? Like we saw on Pitt, there's so many of these nuances and so many of these personal stories there, right? Like, do you feel like a lot of that will be different now that
Yeah.
we have this, right?
It's interesting as I watch care evolve, and I talk about this a lot actually, because as a 35-year-old company, we've had to kind of align with how care has evolved and healthcare has evolved. And I've been in healthcare that long, so I get to talk about it in a different way. But you know, 35 years ago in the early 90s when teletracking first started, and this is going along your care journey, which is exactly, I think, where we wanna go with this, but, it really hospitals were independent. They were maybe they might be academic medical centers, but single hospitals, it might be owned by physicians. There were a lot of community hospitals, those sort of things, and care we really cared about it. Like, I was a house supervisor at that point, and you worried about, like, care going from the ED to the ICU and the ICU to the floor, but not really anything else. If you needed to transfer between hospitals or health systems, it was done through relationships, and so, like, I would call somebody that I'd done my fellowship with, and I'd transfer my patient across town, but it was really community based, and care has evolved so much. The care continuum has evolved so much. And yet, exactly what you say, Jean, when you think about it, we always talk about sort of ambulatory acute and post acute, but the self care part of it, the part that is before and during and after all of those things, is the part that I think is getting influenced so much. There's so much consumer choice at this point, and but it is dependent on so many different things, what your access to care is, what your access to technology is, what your access to payers or insurance is going to define all of those different things. I do think about when people come in with chat gpt and this whole kind of printout. We used to call it Dr. Google. Like, you'd come in with Dr. Google and you'd tell me all the things that were wrong with you. Chat gpt is a little bit more robust, but still never it really doesn't do a very good job of being personal. And I mean, we all know it's not really reasoning. It's just taking patterns from before and after anything, right? I mean, that's what generative AI is. But will it make a difference? I do think it will, but we're going to have to help it do that, because there is a significant part of our communities that the emergency department is the only place they can seek care. And so, how do we help health systems kind of figure out a way to separate that care in a way that is more efficient and more effective for the patients that they're providing care for? So, for example, you see emergency departments that have urgent cares next door, or fast tracks, or, places where care can happen faster because what they don't need is the full scope of the emergency department. Patients who are holding for admission are taking emergency department beds. And so, how do we move those patients through so that the emergency department can actually be an emergency department? And then, health education is important. And frankly, we're not doing a very good job of teaching people how to be healthy from the time. So we do a lot of sick care here in the US, but that's a whole different philosophic story.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many things I can ask about that, but like, let's go back to maybe your personal story a little bit as a nurse and as a not a nursing executive, but a clinical executive
Yeah.
at a technology company. What do you think makes nurses better leaders and just amazing human beings? I have worked with nurses all throughout my career as a data analyst, as a manager of analytics, and working with trying to get the data and computing quality measures and doing all that stuff. And really, it all goes back to the nurses. And I have just seen so many good human beings all throughout my career. What do you think just makes that nurse dynamic as a make you such a good human being?
Yeah. Well, we're still the number one trusted profession, right? And have been for, as long as they've been doing that study. So I still think that people trust nurses, even if they don't trust their healthcare system, or if they don't trust, kind of the thinking around healthcare right now. I think they still trust nurses to do the right thing. Why is that? I think nurses, I know I have had people ask me, well, why didn't you go to medical school? And it's not I would do this, I would go to medical school, or I would be a nurse, and that's a lesser thing. They're different things. As nurses, we learn to care for the whole person. And so I think you see that. We learn different ways to reduce pain besides just pain medicine. That's a tool in our toolkit, but it is not the only tool. You might be repositioning, or, giving a cool cloth, or those sorts of things. I think nurses listen in a way that is we are taught to listen for the things that are not always said. And so you kind of listen with a different lens. I think that nurses are with people at the best times of their lives and the worst times of their lives. And to hold the hand of a patient or their family. So I worked in the ICU for a long time, and it's the families that I got the closest to. you got to listen to them tell the stories about their loved ones in a way that is irreplaceable. I felt like it was an honor to have that kind of intimacy with a patient's family who would tell me those types of stories. And for me to provide the grace and permission for them to grieve in the way that was important to them. I feel like being a nurse is such a gift because people don't say, "Do you nurse?" You say, "I am a nurse," right? It is who you are in the being of who you are. And so whether it's, some little one at a soccer game that someone comes running over and says, "Michelle, I know you're a nurse. Can you look at this? What do we need?" Maybe I don't do pediatrics, but I can certainly comfort someone who's in pain and provide, comfort to someone who's anxious. And same thing on the other end of it. I don't know how many people that I've been able to say, when you're not here with your loved one, I'm here for you. And I will be happy to hold their hand when they take their last breath and not let someone be alone in those processes. And I think nurses are, why are we good at what we do? I think we are really resourceful. We figure out how to do a lot with not much, right?
Yeah.
We can tell someone, we can give direction to someone very easily and quickly in a kind and gentle way. Not always. Sometimes it takes a little bit more force than that. We assess in ways that is not, we look for the not obvious in our ways of assessing, and we pull things together. Nurses have to figure out how to facilitate something. They don't always have the power and authority of others in the conversation, but I can guarantee you that it's the nurse that's calling the shots and everybody knows it. So I think it helps. I love what I do because I get to be the translator between, like our teams. I'll say something. I think I said this at the conversation where you and I met that at that panel, but I'll say something that sounds like I know what I'm talking about from a technology perspective, and I don't. Like, I'll get just deep enough to have to hand it over to someone else, and I'm happy to do that. And same for them. When we can, by having nurses embedded in the work that we do in technology, I know one of my team members said, "I knew I won the day that our engineering team said, I understand now there's patience at the end of this," right? Like, these aren't just code. This isn't just code that we're writing. These are patients. They're patients' lives that depend on us, and we're facilitating something better. And so I love being able to make that connection for our teams and the work that we do.
That is so true and so important. And part of me is really hoping that we don't lose nurses. Is that like in the hospital of the future, you see all these robots and you see now AI, and then you talk to AI when you check in, you talk to AI when you check out. And we don't, I hope we don't lose this human touch, right? Like, because when you're sick or when there's something wrong, I think there is something else that's added to a situation when you have another human being that can comfort you and be there for you, especially if you're like end of life or you're there with. I lived with my grandfather for a long time and I took care of him. And when he was 92, he passed away. He was in a nursing home. And, I still came and I visited him every week. And, that was important to him, even though,
That's right.
he was on his last, days. But like that kind of human touch, I think is extremely important. And, so I hope we don't lose that.
How do we make sure that nurses can do that and not document in the EMR and spend hours? We know that like burnout in healthcare has been exponentially worse the more technology we add. And so we have to be committed to reversing that trend. And we're seeing it in physicians, right? Ambient listening is reducing burnout for people right now. We know that. We have to focus on nurses. And so, one of the reasons that I think it's so important that I have an executive position as a nurse in a technology company is to be able to bring that voice and say, I understand that these things are very cool. And if it does not reduce the cognitive burden of a nurse, I don't want to talk about it. It's not happy for me. Like we've got to make it easier, not harder for nurses.
Well, God bless you, because I think that's honestly that's what's missing out of all this conversation that I'm hearing about ambient scribes and all the kind of progress we've done in terms of introducing that. Like, what about the nurses? What about the whole end to end, which is actually a lot of times nurses are the ones that are taking care of the patient, you know, and nursing practitioners, and depending on which state you are, and nurse may be all you're seeing even in when you're coming, right? So yeah, absolutely. And your point also on you being kind of a conduit to the engineering teams is kind of like I lived that myself, being on the data side and being on the engineering side. And not until I did the executive MBA program at Pitt, which was the first cohort of that healthcare, the MBA, not until I did that did I really understand what like goes on healthcare and what providers are dealing with and what is going on, in the administrative, a layer and all the way down to the patient. Because a lot of the providers that are running the health system, they're still seeing patients all throughout. And then nurses, I don't know, like, are you still every time you're in the hospital, I'm sure you have this like probably natural instinct to go help out this person over there.
Yes. I always.
Yeah, you're always caring for somebody, right? Whether it might be your engineering team though, like that you're
Right.
answering
I
their
know.
clinical questions.
One the other day, I was like, "I can make you a butterfly bandage. Let me just get a pair of scissors."
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I guess we have maybe another, I don't know, 5, 10 minutes, and then we can wrap it up. But any interesting stories that you have from just being, I guess growing up in Colorado,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, interesting stories about growing up in Colorado. So that is where my passion for rural healthcare comes in. So I grew up in the eastern plains of Colorado, outside of Colorado Springs, and we did not. We were very rural. My parents were, I would say, they're kind of hippies, and we did not have a phone, and we did not have a TV, and so we had a lot of imagination. And my sister and I would we had horses and so did, our friends and families. And like, I remember one time that, my mom, I was like, I grew up, in the 70s and 80s. And so there's all the memes about Gen Xers about how, our parents were like, get out in the morning and stay out all day until the streetlights come on. And we didn't even have streetlights. And so until it got dark enough not to see anymore. And so I know there was one time during the winter and my friend's pond freezes over in the winter. It was cold enough then in Colorado that time of in the winter. And my sister, who's 5 years younger than I am, was kind of like Mikey, like she'll do anything. And so we put her in like a 50-gallon barrel and we were scooting her across this icy pond. Like exactly. Like you think about that now, and you're like, what were you all doing?
yeah,
But it
I
was
hope the ice didn't crack.
it did
I
not
hope she made it. Okay,
totally
that's good.
was totally safe. We always used Stephanie as like our little pawn in all these things. Like we had turkeys and they would chase you if you had anything in your hand. And so like I would give my sister things to put in her hands and then like she would run and the turkeys would chase her, or like she always rode on the back. We always rode bareback on the horse. And so she rode behind me and I would make it trot because she was little and it would bounce her right off the back, like, I mean, she just was she was like our little play toy. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun growing up like that. The passion that I have for rural healthcare came from living in those, Colorado, Montana, kind of Oregon, those kind of states, because, when rural healthcare can't survive, you can't age in those communities and you can't grow in those communities. You can't grow a family if you don't have healthcare. So as we think about like the impact of the decisions we make around rural healthcare, we have to remember that we can't take it from the city perspective, So here we are in Pittsburgh, but we have to be thinking about rural Pennsylvanians and how do they access healthcare? And, driving to Pittsburgh is incredibly overwhelming and getting people closer to home. We know that their outcomes are better. Care closest to home is the way to deliver care. And so, that's part of, you'll hear me talk about that as one of my passions is how do we kind of maintain and sustain and grow rural healthcare in a way that's right for them, not from the perspective of the city.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like those hospitals in if they have a hospital in the rural, more rural setting or rural designation, let's say it's an actual designation by the federal government of what's rural, what's not, which sometimes doesn't really, you know. But the interesting part is, and I think you've seen this on the pit as well, is people get flown in from all over the place, and especially in Pittsburgh, like AGH, Shady Side, Presby, all of these kind of like core hospitals in Pittsburgh. And then people get flown in by helicopter from maybe, middle of the state or whatever. And it's funny when I was actually working on the provider side, there there was actually a algorithm that was developed that would say like, is this person going to make it if
Yeah,
we're going to airlift them out?
that's right.
And at that point, this was like way before the large language models. This was just the
Huh,
regular,
just an
machine.
old-fashioned algorithm.
This was just the deep forest machine learning model that was developed by one of the wonderful data scientists that worked there and are still there.
Yeah, we look at
Uh,
the
um,
scores all the time on, whether especially in the ICU.
yeah. So I think that this has been a great conversation, Michelle. I really appreciate everything you do, and I just love the fact that you're a nurse and you're leading this amazing company and doing a lot in the space to help hospitals be more efficient. And yeah, would love to catch up again anytime and hear about anything else that you guys are working on. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.